It's a PowerPoint presentation.
Ah,
You might have to refresh the agenda if you don't see it.
all right.
Yeah. Couldn't do it at the hotel, couldn't do it in CAT. She was at Sampson County Schools, she couldn't do it at the hotel.
I know it's probably some kind of like thing or something that happened. You haven't told anybody about it.
Investigation.
But Mark's already told me. I said, all right, I started looking, but I figured it was something that was happening.
Well, if it's not followed, but if it's not Friday, we're gonna need to know so that we can.
So my test, what I was thinking about is if I could borrow
But I can get somebody.
Okay.
Bring it back to me in the morning. For a break.
What?
Yes, sir.
Sure thing, Cora. Just say so. Are you okay now?
Carl, once we get started, you're gonna wanna mute yourself so we don't hear any background noise, okay?
Good evening. I call this October 2nd, 2023 special call Board of Education meeting to order. At this time, I call upon Dr. Wendy Miller, Superintendent, to take a roll call of the Board of Education.
Good evening, board members. Ms. Naomi Clark. Present. Ms. Jennifer Wagner. Jennifer Daisy, sorry. Present. Jennifer Wagner. Present. Mr. Carr, I talk virtually. Present. Ms. Lauren Kitzinger. Present. Ms. Kelly Hughes.
Present.
Mr. Brent Manning.
Present.
Mr. Scott Murphy.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to remind the board that there can be no amendments to the agenda because it is a special called meeting. I ask for a motion to adopt the October 2nd, 2023 meeting agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor, let it be known by the raising of your right hand. And motion passes. At this time, I will ask Scott Murphy to cover our safety procedures for the room.
In the event of a fire emergency, we will split the room in half. The right side of the room will exit out to the door to my left. The left side of the room will exit out the door to my right. Those moving to my right will go into the parking lot towards the bagel shop. Those moving to my left will go out to the digital sign near Glen Street. You get as far away from the building until the fire department comes and clears the building.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I would like to call our board attorney, Mr. Brian Gatchell, to come and lead us with invocation tonight for our meeting.
Board members, if you please pray with me. Heavenly Father, break forth your light like the dawn, the Holy One, and bring your healing to our world, to this place and to our lives. Only with your blessing will we be restored. Only with you as our guide will we find our direction. Only with you as our rear guard will our efforts be found righteous. Guide us always in the sun-scorched land of mistrust and animosity. Satisfy our desire for clarity and replenish our lack of respect for you and for each other. Strengthen the framework of our democracy, that what we do today will shore up the foundation of our country government, repair the breach of the broken walls of our common good, and restore the paths which lead toward the faithful stewardship of our nation's trust. Hear us when we call, O Lord, and preside over us in the events of these days ahead, that we may find healing in the certainty of your presence and approval in the accomplishment of your will. In your sovereign name we pray. Amen.
And this time I would like to ask Ms. Kelly Hughes to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, it is at this time that the Board of Education will receive preliminary scenarios from Mr. Mike Miller from Numerics that we welcome in this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello.
All right, hold on just a minute if you don't mind. Is our microphones working for online?
Yeah, it's turned all the way up.
All the way up?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, it's my pleasure to be in front of you this evening. We should have a PowerPoint going on for a second.
That's the right one.
No, just look at you to click it.
Just next, if you will.
Will do, thank you. It's my pleasure to be in front of you this evening to present draft one of student assignment plans for the year 2024-25. Draft one contains four options, four scenarios. You'll hear that word a lot tonight. The scenario is simply a map showing what the new lines might look like if the board approves, and the data behind those maps that show how the schools are impacted, how many kids we can expect after the lines are redrawn. My job this evening is to provide information, to try to guide you through this fairly complicated thing that you're going to be looking at. There are multiple data sources, there are multiple maps, and we'll take it slow through each one, but by the time we're finished this evening, I hope that the board will have enough information to take these materials and live with them a little bit, study them, ask questions about them, and I hope you can get out of this meeting tonight with that kind of information, with that education, to be able to approach this information in an intelligent manner. We'll start off with the assumptions. Actually, let me backtrack just a little bit. In addition to the PowerPoint that we're looking at, you should have in your packet basically 3 printouts. And I'm going to keep those on my desk at all times, just kind of refer to them as I need to. The first one is got vertical columns that are kind of color-coded a little bit just to differentiate between the different scenarios. This is a utilization table. As we come to scenarios, we'll walk through that. Then you'll have 2 other documents that look kind of similar. The one with a bunch of squares in it is I call it an impact table, and it approximates, it estimates the number of kids that are moving from one existing school to another existing school. There is a set of tables for elementary schools, there's a set for middle schools, and there's a set for high schools. Each one of those sets has 4 options, 4 scenarios in there. So when we learn about one scenario, a lot of that stuff will inform how you would view the second scenario and the third scenario. They're all similar in how they're presented. So you might want to keep these documents out in front of you, and as we'll refer to them, and some of them overlap with the PowerPoint material, some of them do not. I'll try to point that out as we get there. Go back one, please. The scenarios that we're gonna look at tonight, 4 scenarios are built on the following assumptions. The board charged me to look at options that would provide a better balance of building utilization. Utilization is how many students per building capacity. As we discussed in our previous meeting, we're using program capacity, which is the capacity that a given classroom is designed to serve, whether it's kindergarten or 5th grade or 9th grade. The board also asked me to provide some consolidation options for repurposing 2 of the elementary schools, Granby Barden and J.T. Barber. So the scenarios will look at various impacts of repurposing those 2 schools. Another requirement that, or consideration that the board asked me to look at was to maintain feeder patterns. A feeder pattern, if you're not familiar with the term, is, for example, if a elementary school, all the kids in that base attendance area for the elementary school go to one single middle school, that's a clean feeder, elementary to middle. Same thing from middle to high. I was asked to look at maintaining those feeder patterns to the extent possible as well, so we did that. The numbers we're going to look at on these utilization tables and on the impact tables are derived from 2023-24, or this current school year, district student data located by residence. So we create these scenarios based on where the children live, and assuming they go to their base school. There are transfers in every district. We're perfectly aware of that. This does not try to calculate all the transfers. Things change when the lines change, so it's not a particularly fruitful or meaningful thing to get into transfers. Excuse me. And finally, pre-K were not included in this particular scenarios that we're going to see. There's last count, there was 177 pre-K students enrolled. So it is a consideration that will have to be talked about before the board would approve any of these scenarios or another scenario, but they're not included in the numbers tonight. Okay, next. First scenario, scenario A. This scenario repurposes Graham A. Barden and J.T. Barber, both.
They're saying they can't hear it online.
The general system-wide statistics that are important to keep in mind for this one is if those 2 schools, by the way, Barden has a capacity of 288. Oh, sure, okay, thank you. And J.T. Barber has a capacity of 312. So if those 2 schools are repurposed, or taken out of play, so to speak, the system-wide utilization across the entire district would be about 105% for elementary kids, about 80% for middle school, and about 87% for high school. So there is certainly some room to move around in middle and high school. The elementary school is fairly tight, moving those 2 schools. Scenario A impacts about 1,240 K-5 students. These are all estimates, of course. Scenario A impacts about 220 middle school students and about 130 high school students. I'll make a remark about the map. I fully realize that you can't see the detail on the map on PowerPoint. There are maps that are printed in large format of each of the scenarios, and maybe you can take an opportunity to look at those a little closer a little later in the meeting. And I also understand that these are available by PDF, so you can zoom in. That is the most useful format that I can tell you. You're able to zoom into areas of downtown and then have a lot where it's a little more dense, so that might be helpful. Okay, next. The next few slides look at utilization. So we look at this in terms of a PowerPoint. I gotta split it up so you can kind of see it. So they're always looking at this in 3 high school clusters, Havelock, New Bern, and West Craven. The same information is on one of your handouts. So if you look at scenario A, it may be arranged in a slightly different way. But if you look at scenario A in this table, Havelock Elementary for scenario A is estimated at 331 kids, giving it a utilization of 106% if the lines were redrawn according to scenario A. Havelock Mid on the same page and on the table. For scenario A, you're looking at 405 students, which puts it at about 74% utilization. So the tables on the PowerPoint, and in this case on the handout, line up. They're all in one place for you to study on this page. I guess I'll go over some of the I guess highlights or higher points on this. You can tell by this scenario that Graham A. Barden, if you look across the top, there's no entries for membership or utilization. That's one of the schools in this scenario that was repurposed, so it's no longer in play. We don't have those 288 seats in play. Next slide, please. This focuses on the New Bern area, the New Bern cluster. So as another example, Vanguard, I think before any of these scenarios were drawn, it was about 135%. So one of the ideas was try to shrink that down and make it more manageable, and the scenario does provide that. For scenario A, Vanguard has 345 estimated membership. That puts it at 110%, as an example. Quinn, 396 at 127%. As we mentioned before, the overall utilization is high. So you may have schools that are below that average, that system-wide average of 105%, or in this case, above that average of 105%. It's not really feasible to generate a scenario where every school gets 105%, because people live in neighborhoods, there are transportation issues. You got a big old river in the middle of the county that only has certain ways you can go across. So there's always some kind of unequalness in the utilization for these scenarios. Next slide, please. And finally, for scenario A, this is the West Craven area. And putting all those three together, for scenario A, the highest utilization occurs at Roger Bell Elementary, which, by the way, no lines changed in Roger Bell in any of these scenarios due to its geography. There's really not a way, unless you skip over it and grab kids farther away, there's really not a way due to where it's placed. So Roger Bell continues to have 127% utilization. Quinn has 127%, and the minimum is Tucker Creek Mid with 61%. So that's a range, slightly less than it is to right now, but still a fairly wide range of utilization. That was the slides about building utilization, how many kids we can expect. So that's one of these sheets, and that's one of the parts of the presentation. If we go to the next slide, this is where the impact tables come in. So this table presents a slightly different picture than your handouts. I think you can use them both in conjunction. For scenario A, this table looks at how many of the existing schools are impacted. In other words, do any parts of these existing schools go to a new school? The first column is the sending school. So if you look at the first row, Vanguard is sending populations, neighborhoods to Quinn and to Brinson Memorial. And at that point, if you pull up your handout and look at the elementary, I'll guide you through that because it kind of connected documents. So the very first page of the elementary one, which is the one with all the boxes, looking at scenario A and traveling from left to right, you'll see that Bangor has some kids that are going to Bangor, stay where they are. And then you'll also see some kids going to Quinn and then to Brinson Memorial. So this table says the same kind of information that the table on the PowerPoint does. That's how you read those. You'll notice that kind of in the middle of this table, Graham A. Barden, since that was one of the schools that was repurposed, it sent its children to 3 different schools, Edwards, Havelock, and Urbanus, while Barber, another one of the schools in the scenario that was repurposed, sent the children to Bridgeton and Oaks Road. Another piece of information that may not be obvious from this table, but if you count all the schools starting in the second column and working to the right, that's the total number of areas in the district that are being reassigned in this scenario. And for scenario A, that's 16 for the elementary schools. So counting all those things on the right side of the table, you got 16 different moves going on for elementary. Next. Same idea for the impact of middle and high schools for scenario A. Grover Fields is a sending school to H.J. McDonald. Tucker Creek is a sending school to Grover Fields. And there's only one high school that's impacted in all 4 scenarios, as a matter of fact, and that's Havelock is sending some kids to New Bern. That high school, or middle and high school information is on the second table, the one with slightly bigger squares. You read it the same way. Any questions on that information? From here on, it's a lot of the same. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm guessing that in that scenario where the Havelock kids would be pushed up to New Bern, that would be those, it would be similar, where we had to, when we redistricted our board seats, kind of where we came up that corridor a little bit. So it would be the kids like on the New Bern side of 70 in that kind of area.
We'll take a walk and look at the maps, and I'll point out where these areas are on that. There's a challenge in these kinds of things. We have 3 levels going on simultaneously because we want to look at feeder patterns. So there's a challenge in kind of putting all that stuff in 3 levels, and actually what it looks like today and what the scenario is presenting. But we will take some time, I hope, and walk down and point this out. So that's another way of looking at this information. The numbers are here, and the map tells you something different.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Sure. So recapping for scenario A, that's repurposing 2 of the elementary schools, Barton and J.T. Barber, resulting in 16 elementary moves, 2 middle school moves, and 1 high school move. Next. In scenario B, only 1 of the elementary schools is repurposed, that's J.T. Barber. Overall system-wide utilization, these are important numbers because it kind of gives you a feel for what's going on system-wide as far as total number of seats. Elementary utilization is at 99%, middle at 80, and high at 87. The 80 and the 87 was the same as the last scenario. We haven't moved any schools there. Approximately 890 K-5 students are reassigned in scenario B, 180 6-8 students, and 90 high school students for scenario B. Next please. All right, for scenario B, again, J.T. Barber is the school that is optionally repurposed for this one. So Barton has some of the Barton does have entries in this particular table. And I won't go over each one of these, but I'll point out the maximums and the minimums that may be useful too. For scenario B, the maximum utilization is at Quinn with 127%. The minimum utilization is at Fields, Riversea Fields at 65%. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's the one where we're focusing on New Bern, so you can tell the JT Barber's slot is open there. It's being repurposed. Next slide. And finally for West Craven. Okay, next. Another impact table. Again, cross-reference this with your handout. For scenario B, repurposing JT Barber, we're looking at a total of 11 elementary moves, 2 middle school moves, and 1 high school move. Bangor, again, going to Quinn and Brinson Memorial. Quinn going to James W. Smith. Arthur Edwards in this particular scenario, because we're not looking at Barden, does not move. Or at least it doesn't send kids out. Next slide, please. This is similar to the scenario A. Next one. Scenario C is kind of the flip side. Scenario A looked at 2 schools being repurposed. Scenario B looked at 1 school, JT Barber. This looks at 1 school, Brandon Barton being repurposed. System-wide utilization about the same as scenario B at 99%. Again, 80% for middle school and 87% for high. About 800 kids, K-5 kids, elementary kids were reassigned. 220 middle school kids, 130 high school kids for this scenario. Next slide. So scenario C again, Graham A. Barton is repurposed, so it doesn't have a membership utilization. I'll go over the maxes and mins again. For scenario C, the maximum is Roger Ardell at 127% on this chart here. And the minimum is Tucker Creek Middle School at 61%, also on this chart. Next slide, please. Focusing on New Bern, same situation. If you just zoom into New Bern, the maximum is at Trent Park Elementary with 125%. The minimum is at Riversea Fields with about 71% utilization. Next slide. And finally, West Craven.
Can we go back to that previous slide? I'm sorry. I think the highest utilization I see there has been Quinn, correct? At 125? I mean, 127?
My bad. Yeah,
Okay.
I missed that one.
Just making
Thank
sure
you.
I'm
Yeah, I got it
right
circled
now.
here. I didn't say it. So,
Okay.
yeah, my bad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that. Next slide. Okay, next slide, and the final, impacts, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Next slide, please. There we go. For scenario C, total number of impacts is 13 elementary moves, 2 middle school moves, and 1 high school move. And this is the one that repurposed Graham A. Barton, and you can see that Graham A. Barton students are reassigned to Arthur Edwards, Havelock, and Gerdanus. These tables kind of making a little more sense now? Good, good. Next slide, please. And next slide. And the final scenario we'll look at tonight is scenario D. This has no schools repurposed, so all the schools are in play. And you'll notice for each of these elementary scenarios, the utilization has dropped because you have more seats available, obviously, so it increases or decreases utilization. System-wide, the utilization is about 94% for elementaries, and again, 80% for middle schools and 87% for high schools. This scenario reassigns about 440 elementary kids, 180 middle school kids, and 130 high school kids. Next slide. Again, I won't go over the details here. This is all information for you to soak in as you can. Here in scenario D, once again, none of the schools are repurposed. All the schools are in play. Maximum for scenario D, 127% at Quinn. The minimum is 65% at Grover C. Fields. Next slide. And next slide. And one more time. For scenario D, this probably impacted the fewest number of kids. There was a total of 8 elementary moves, 2 middle school moves, and 1 high school move. Next slide. And next slide. There is additional information in the appendix. I have a couple slides here on growth. That was one of the questions that came up in our last meeting. So I'd like to speak to that, but there is more information about feeder patterns in the appendix, and I would like to at least show you how to look at that kind of information too. When we first started this redistricting exploration, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk to some of the county and municipal planning agencies to see what their thoughts were, what their perspectives were about future growth. We talked to Craven County Planning, we talked to New Bern Planning, Havelock Planning, and Mr. Lee had a meeting with the military liaison, and we have some information about that too. As far as, I'll try to put this in as few words or as simple as possible, the consensus seems to be like that even though we don't have a lot of growth today in the school, and we've seen this over the last 5 or 6 years in the school, is in terms of younger populations growth, school-age children growth. There is continued growth, not super growth, but continued growth in areas of the county, especially looking at existing subdivisions with infill. There are areas, and this seems to be fairly countywide, where subdivisions that had been established for a while, people are coming in and finishing up building them out. So building out homes for those subdivisions. The outlier, at least for the county and municipal planners, was Havelock. Havelock Planning reported several apartments in development, maybe a total of 400 units all together. Several with 100 or 200 units, put them all together, you've probably got about 400 or so, maybe more. So there is something happening down in the south. Havelock also mentioned a Warehouser tract off Lake Road that may see, these are not approved, but that may see as many as 100,000 or more units with both single and multifamily homes on an 8 to 10 year build out. We just thought you should be aware of those kinds of dynamics. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides are about the expected workforce increases at Cherry Point. The way they're coming at this is the known increase, and this is workforce, civilian and military combined, is about 1,250. You can see by this table it starts in 2024 next year and extends to 2027. And they're also talking about an additional, they call it potential increase, with a grand total of about 1,968 workforce. That would be, the extra part would be beginning in 2028 and over 1 year to 2029. Next slide, please. The Havelock planners was the development that we are seeing down there may be in response to these future needs of military families moving in. This table is also from Cherry Point Liaison. It kind of spells out what these numbers are and how many are civilian, how many are military, but the totals are still the same, about 1,300 expected and about 1,900 plus potential. Next slide, please. Maybe we can come back to this. This is a timeline, and maybe we can talk about this in a moment. I want to share with you the feeder pattern information. So, yeah, let's go to the next. Let's start here. There was a request to the board last time about other school systems, the historic enrollment of other school systems in Craven County. How's that impacting Craven County schools? DPI reports no charter schools within Craven County borders. I'm not aware of any as well. But there are home schools, there are private schools. Home schools have seen a fairly predictable increase, especially occurring in 2020, which is when we see a bump for home schools throughout the state. But what did strike me here is the private school enrollment. I mean, you're talking about 1,069 enrolled in private schools in the county in 2017, and then moving up, positive increase every year, moving up to an estimated about 1,600 in 2022 for private schools. So that's something that kind of stuck out to me. Okay, next slide, please. Another table with a lot of stuff in it. So what we did here was look at if a child is in, let's choose Edwards, Arthur W. Edwards. What is the path of that child through elementary, through middle, through high school? So this feeder pattern table tells you that for each of the scenarios. For example, for scenario A in Arthur, a child in Arthur W. Edwards would be the same base as Tucker Creek, so they would feed cleanly to Tucker Creek, and then to Havelock High. Bridgeton, on the other hand, with scenario A, remember scenario A has 2 schools repurposed. Bridgeton, on the other hand, would split into 2 middle schools, H.J. McDonald, which is a new feeder pattern, and West Craven, which is an existing feeder pattern. H.J. McDonald would go to New Bern High School, that's new, and West Craven would go to West Craven High School, which is the same as it is today. So I tried to notate where these new feeders came out in this table. Brinson Memorial, you can see H.J. McDonald again, which is a new feeder pattern, but they already go to New Bern, so that's not necessarily new. Graham A. Barton and J.T. Barber in this table are repurposed, so they don't have the feeder pattern. And on the bottom, Gerganus, elementary child in Gerganus would either go to Tucker Creek or Havelock, and Havelock is a new feeder pattern in scenario A. And then both of those would go to Havelock High School. So that's how to read those. Together with the impact tables and the feeder patterns and the maps, you gotta put the whole picture together. And if you go to the next slide, please, I won't go through all these. Here's the same feeder patterns for scenario B. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
So I just want to interject, I'm going to pretend I'm Mr. iPod for just a minute, okay? I get to be the historian for just a minute. So on the feeder pattern for Brinson, going to H.J. McDonald, so I got to live it. So the original feeder pattern for me as a mom was when my child went to middle school, he went to H.J. And then when we redistricted, my other child got to go to to Grover. So really, I mean, for some of us, I mean, we've already kind of experienced that with some of our children, with our Brenton kids going to H-Tech.
Okay. Next slide, please. It's the same thing for scenario C. There's a new feeder pattern from Bridgeton and then one at Gurganis again. Next slide. And there's also two new ones here for Bridgeton and Brinson. So, a lot of information. At some point, I'd like to walk around with board members and look at the maps. You have PDF copies of these, so you'll be able to zoom in. And I'd like to kind of explain the legend and how the things work. And you put all these pieces together, and that's what you need to be able to study these different scenarios. So, with your permission, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay.
Question. So just one follow-up question, and I think Mr. Lee and I discussed this a little bit. I know there's been, I saw a question somewhere out in social media world about, is the board considering what's happening in regard to the F-35 coming this year? The point clearly we are, these numbers have been considered. So the only follow-up question that I have on this is really one that I don't expect either of you all to answer, but is one that I think we really need an answer from the base on, and that is, as I understand it, they have formulas that they can use to predict the dependents that come with the personnel they anticipate, and that is going to depend on obviously the age of the personnel. So if we are talking about 40-year-old or 35-year-old pilots who have families, that's one thing as opposed to new enlisted young men who are often single. So I guess my question is, I know you probably already tried to get that, but it would be really awesome if we had it sooner rather than later.
We made requests,
Okay.
and we haven't received anything back yet,
Okay.
so, there may or may not be a form.
Right,
So-
I've heard that there is, and that's why I just felt like, we needed to try and at least get that information so that we have as complete a picture as we possibly can, because I think many of us who have been in the community a long time have heard numbers for many years. These numbers are lower than I would have anticipated personally based on the discussions that I've heard over time. So we obviously want for you to have the most accurate numbers
Yes.
that you can.
I can say that I was involved in the BRAC reorganization a decade ago, I guess now, involving a lot of counties around Cumberland County.
Yes.
And they did provide those formulas at that point. I'm not saying that it's the same or anything like that, but I for that particular situation, yes, there was, and they were stratified out for different military levels. So yes, they do pay attention to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have some questions, Mr. Chair. First question, when we talk about repurposing the J.T. Barber, how was it determined that those kids, for the most part, will go to Bridgeton?
Bridgeton was, in the very first analyses, which was actually the last scenario, what would it look like to reassign children throughout the county to make more efficient use of our buildings and to maybe shorten some transportation for some of them? And one of the things that popped out, probably the most striking thing that popped out to me, was Bridgeton coming over the river into Newburgh. And as we looked at these different scenarios with these different assumptions, some of the schools being repurposed, like J.T. Barber, it's still, the computer wants to push it still into Newburgh to balance utilization for the other schools there. Because now, without J.T. Barber, you have 288 fewer seats. And Bridgeton was, I'm not gonna say it's the closest school, but with all the other things into play, and some of the schools that were closer to Barber were overutilized, so we couldn't use them. Now without other schools being impacted, so Bridgeton showed up again and again as a school that was trying to attract students from Newburgh. So it did make a lot of sense to me after a while, but that's why that one came across the bridge there.
The next question, and Mr. Hypock, I defer to you as the historian. When it was redistricted last time, the schools, those kids who were residents of News Harbor and River Bluff, thank you, were not going to Gervais. So how was that determined?
Once again, it comes down to trying to balance the utilization and looking at, since the schools, and many of them are so tight, what happened was if you had to move Brinson, for example, up into New Bern to grab some of the kids at JT Barber or some other area in there, then you had to backfill from farther down south. So when we look at questions like that, it's not a single answer. There's all kinds of schools involved in every one of these scenarios. Almost all. There are some that are not impacted. Roger Bell is an example that I can remember. But in most of the schools, we'll see some kind of movement because there's just not that much room in them to get more students in their base without affecting another school. So it was a big, huge, domino effect of in some cases, 16 elementary schools trying to achieve what the goals of the scenario, which is to better balance utilization and to look at consolidation for those repurposed schools. So it's a fairly complicated answer, but the shortest I can make it is if you move one school here, you've got to backfill somewhere else because you don't really have enough room to not do that. That's why. Would you like to take a look at the maps?
Very good. Very good. Yes, sir.
All right, good.
Deception.
Yes, it is. I think it's helpful. PDF's a little weird. That's right. Sometimes they lay on top of each other like this right here. See that? That is a current line for both elementaries and for middle schools. So they're kind of buried in one. Let me get some feedback. I try to get away to put everything together and see all 4 layers, because I think in some ways that's more helpful to you because you can kind of see what the other patterns are, but they become more complicated. Would it be helpful if I did separate maps for each one? Yes. Yeah. And if we can do that, I have different ways of indicating which areas are moving, but you can't put them together separately. Or maybe you can. I can. Okay. You can do. Good try.
Okay, and so, sorry. So one question I have, so
Brenton Elementary, is the lowest population school, just all donations. So how do we?
I think it's one of the larger schools. I don't know, I can't
I mean,
answer
the
that.
building's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah, the building, that's the
I mean, I know
reason.
what I use.
A lot of your schools are. So what happened, and the scenarios from Barber reacted to it. So you see Brinson coming up, and split it. It also comes down here. Because there's
Just
other
a
stuff
reminder,
happening.
no sidebars.
Scenario
Just a
A,
reminder, no sidebars.
so Urganus has to take some, or Edwards has to take some. Havelock has to take some. So in order to even those out, Brinson came down a little bit here as well. And Creekside too. Creekside is down here. So it's hard to point a finger at exactly one cause. There's a lot of things going on, but that's the reason Brinson really did spread out right there. New area for Brinson.
Hold it back across the other side of the 70.
Now, this used to be Creekside.
And that's Rankin Road, so before Brenton was built, okay, so before Brenton was built, before Creekside was built, all of this used to be Brenton. Because I've always viewed Brenton and Creekside as sister schools, because when Creekside got built, Brenton split. Yeah, so Brenton split. Planners Beach newspaper, so, see, all these kids over on this side of 70, before the redistricting happened originally, all these kids used to go to Brenton.
So why are they so still letting them come back and have a then you're gonna have, Roger Bell overcast.
Well, I can't address the Roger Bell.
Well,
There's,
these kids way up here would impact Roger Bell down here.
yeah,
This is all like Harlow kids and down one way,
there
a lot
is,
of it.
there's a limited number of kids right next to Havelock High that it wouldn't do much to the numbers. It would be making a very small change that doesn't impact the numbers. I agree, Roger Bell. But I don't see when you're doing it without going, the kids are here and here. There's a few right there, right next to the school.
The only other way that you could do it would be to jut in here, maybe?
No, it would be, there's a slicer right there, but the area too close to the school. There's only one area that really makes sense. In fact, it's within the realm of variability.
Because of all the bulk out of one.
They're right here. These dotted lines are current. Yeah, so if they're red, that's elementary, so, this would have been, Edwards. After there, and there, after, after that, Edwards. So one comment I heard is that, separate map for each of the layers would be helpful to you.
This would be more populated here and help us down here would be. I'm guessing as far as kids, this is more heavily populated than what this little strip would be.
Yeah.
But see, here's a good example. These are easy to see. So, that's a dotted line, right? So the color means that James W. Smith grab some of this, so the blues James, but also grab a little bit of Oaks Road so those three pieces, boom, boom, now going to James, because they have space. So that, and here, this is all pointing towards Bridgeton, because if you want Bridgeton to be able to help downtown, you gotta move some of the asphalt. You can't. There's this. Long ways. We're skipping over schools, which can be done. You got a bridge here. Obviously, you got a bridge there. That becomes an issue. So those are like the two main areas that I have to pay attention to for this piece right here, going back to what's Craven Middle. That was an example.
We wish you were here.
Yes, I'm looking forward to looking at them when I get back.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's the presentation as far as that goes. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And did have some good feedback on the map formats, and I'll get working on that immediately.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Do you mind, just for the sake of our public, going back to slide 31 and just looking back and talking over next steps, just so everybody knows?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth. So typically what would happen after this stage here is some type of community engagement where the community would be able to look at one or more scenarios that the board might choose. And I understand this is not a choice for you tonight. This is just an educational session. And community engagement would mean that the public would come out and see maps. They'd see the data tables, and me and staff and hopefully some board members would walk around and try to answer questions about which neighborhoods are being moved and things like that. Very, very helpful. If seeing something that I may not be able to see or you may not be able to see. And so those are good. After that, we take board feedbacks, community engagement feedback, staff feedback. If there's any revisions on any of the scenarios that you'd like to see, that's when that process takes place. And then I come back with a draft 2. And then it's kind of in your court.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. That kind of helps to recap. Y'all want to take a break and then come back and?
I got one question before we go on break, if that's okay.
Sure.
Sorry, Mr. Lee. So based on the data and information that he's given us, with our facility needs, right? Because I'm kind of surprised with some of the buildings that are on here. I mean, we haven't talked about the facility needs of, Because to me, it's a twofold deal. If we're gonna look at closing schools, we have to know which facilities are in the worst shape, right? Because that would be the goal, to close the facilities that are in the worst shape. So to me, for me, it's a twofold deal. Does that make sense?
Sort of. I mean, in this, what we're looking at is building utilization. So I mean, if you look at capacity, you almost have to separate that from the state of the building, because like in Havelock area, we have no options at the middle school level because of capacity. So they Havelock Middle has to stay in the play, even though that could be one of the older schools that you would consider because of the facility needs. You can't do anything from it from a capacity perspective. So it has to stay in play, because you don't have anywhere to put those kids.
I'm getting
So
a headache.
eventually, if you build a new, if you do some middle school expansion, you build a new middle school in the Havelock area, or if you build a new elementary school, that's sort of different exercise than just strictly utilization.
Right, but here's the problem. I can't guarantee. Oh, I'm getting a headache. I can't. Oh, I'm getting a headache. I can't. I'm just going to say it. I can't guarantee that anybody's going to come off of any money for me to get a new building anywhere. I mean, I know it's like which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So you talk about a rock and a hard place. Well, daggone if we just ain't crammed ourselves in one. Okay, we can take a break now.
Ms. Clark.
We are between a rock and a hard place, and I do anticipate revisions, because 5 years ago, I was there, or whenever it was redistricted. I still understand why all the military kids were taken from Havelock Middle School and plopped into Tucker Creek, no matter where they lived.
Well, I mean,
And is there any wonder why Havelock is underpopulated?
Yeah, I mean, he based his plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, on resident location.
That's
I
right.
mean, it
Mr.
wasn't-
Lee, I'm sorry, can we get you a microphone for our online, just,
Yeah. Yeah, Ms. Clark, I was saying that Mr. Miller used resident location in building these plans. So wherever the kids live determined what his planning scenarios were formed on. So
Yes, sir.
it really didn't, I can't speak to that, because none of these plans took in consideration whether they were military, not military. It was strictly based on residents.
And I had, based on my recollection, he was going to, and he did, he talked with the base officials, and I had presumed that they would have had provided you with that information, saying that 5 or 6 years ago, all the military kids, middle school kids, were taken out of Havelock Middle School and summarily placed at Tucker Creek.
Yes, ma'am, I mean, I don't know why that happened.
Well, I'm suggesting that that's something we need to consider.
Okay.
yes.
I'd like to make a comment about that as well. In looking at these maps, the River Bluffs community, News Harbor, Linwood Highlands, maybe there's a couple that I might have missed by name, but right there in that area by the Toyota dealership, that is hugely military as well. And those are all currently Havelock schools. And I know that because that's where I live, and we're a military family. And each one of these options has all of those neighborhoods now going to New Bern schools. And if there's no way around that, then there's no way around that. But that is going to, I think that the large number of military families that do live that far into James City should perhaps be looked at. Because when I think of my kids going the opposite direction than the way that we go on a daily basis, it doesn't mesh well with how our lives go on a day-to-day basis. So if that could be something that could be considered at all, possibly. I mean, and I know that Creekside is full of military families as well, but they have that school right there in the community. And I say this, I know that Brinson is right there, it's not that far, but the middle schools and the high school take about 20-ish, 25 minutes in the opposite direction than most people go every day for work.
For clarification, are you just speaking? For my clarification, are you just speaking of the middle and high school then?
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
because,
you.
I mean, it just has them going from Gerganis is where they're at right now to Brinson, which, I mean, it's not that far, but the middle schools, I can't tell if it would be Grover or HJ, but,
It's Grover, I think.
okay. But then it would be from Havelock High to Newbern High. So that's
Okay,
just a comment
thank
that I
you.
wanted to make. Thank you.
All right, and we're gonna take a 10-minute break.
I'll just ask you, because you should have access to it anyway, so I'll just ask you.
I call our meeting back to order. All right, here's where we're at. We will take just maybe 5-10 minutes, and if there's any clarifying questions for Mr. Mike while he's here tonight, and then if not, then we will, at our work session on the 17th, we will be able to then, should the pleasure of the board be to move on one of these drafts, we would take one of the drafts, and then the next thing in our timeline or step would be for community engagement. But now for tonight, we've received information for allowing board members to be able to take home everything that we've got, our maps and the data that he's provided, to be able to look at them, study them. And if board members have questions, we can certainly, if you have any clarifying questions, we would take those now. All right, Ms. Dacey?
So just a couple, and I know you've already discussed how you've spoken with planning folks at all of our municipalities and county government, but of course, there are new things in the news every day, and a member of the public here said to me, you know, I read an article today about another new potential development going in down near Craven Forest. Well, if that were to come to fruition, that would impact Ben Quinn. So obviously you don't have any kind of crystal ball, but we've done all the due diligence that is really possible to do about what planners anticipate, correct?
I wouldn't call. As I mentioned in the presentation, it was not a comprehensive land use study.
Right.
I have done those before, where we really drill down. I think we got enough information for me to voice concerns about some of the development that we're seeing in areas of the county, and that the board should be aware that it's not stagnant. There is activity happening down there, and there especially seems to be a lot of potential in the south.
Okay. Thank you.
Any others? All right, hearing none. Mr. Alpach, is he good? I think everybody's good. Okay. All right. We're hearing no other questions. I would ask that Dr. Miller, our superintendent, to facilitate evaluation of the Board of Education's special called meeting. The purpose of the Plus Delta evaluation is to evaluate the work and the process of the meeting and its alignment with the mission of the Craven County Board of Education.
This is always great feedback for a special called meeting because our Plus Deltas may look a little different. In thinking about the purpose of tonight's meeting and what you wanted to accomplish, what worked? What pluses do we have?
I feel like we got a lot of good information, a better understanding of the resources available at our school, I guess, or the capacity of our schools.
All right, other pluses?
The paper maps that we can take home and the digital maps as well.
And I think we had good feedback from staff, and I think we'll have some more about information that staff might want to contribute to this discussion, and information that they could essentially overlay on some of our maps, probably, where we have different resources for different EC populations and things of that nature. So I think that's something that I appreciate staff being here and listening.
All right, what other pluses do we have?
I appreciate the work that went into digging up information for this. I mean, it's a lot. And we're still in a rock and a hard place.
Any other pluses about tonight's processes? All right, in an effort to get better, do we have deltas? It would even be better next time if?
There was a new elementary school in this plan that we could have had information on, where we could, you know, I think it would balance out our pie a little bit. Just saying.
Other deltas? It would even be better next time if? That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. At this time, I would entertain a motion from the Board of Education to adjourn our October 2nd special called meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, let it be known by the raising of your right hand. And motion passes. We are adjourned.
I actually thought about, I would like some $70 million